They didn't choose you because you're weak. They chose you because you always react the same way. When they guilt trip you, you apologize. When they cross the line, you stay quiet. When they reward your silence with more abuse, you call it peace. That's what makes you perfect. Predictable. You're not a victim to them, you're a formula. And, as long as you keep following the script, you are not dealing with manipulation, you are completing it. There's a moment in every manipulator's game when they stop testing your limits and start programming your reactions. They don't need to raise their voice. They don't even need to lie well. They just need you to do what you always do. Explain yourself, blame yourself, soften your voice, walk on eggshells. And when that moment happens, when they realize your kindness is just a sequence of rehearsed guilt, you stop being a person to them. You become a tool. A guaranteed yes. A silence they can count on. A nervous smile that says, "Please don't be mad, I'll adjust." You weren't chosen because you're weak. You were chosen because you're readable. Because you're easier to decode than resist. Because you confuse being agreeable with being safe. Let's be honest. Every time you've said yes, just to avoid conflict, every time you've swallowed your discomfort to keep the peace, you taught them a rule. Push harder, they won't push back. Most people think manipulation is about clever lies. It's not. It's about noticing your habits and betting on them. A manipulator doesn't need to be a genius. They just need to find someone who always tries to make things okay. Someone who keeps explaining, hoping to be understood. Someone who confuses being polite with being powerless. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you said no and didn't feel guilty afterward? When was the last time you left a conversation that crossed your boundary without apologizing for leaving? If those questions made you uncomfortable, you're exactly the person they look for. Not because you're soft, because you don't know where you end and they begin. This is the moment you stop thinking, "Why do they keep doing this to me?" and start asking, "What am I doing that keeps inviting it?" Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim yourself. Because as long as your reactions stay on repeat, so will their control. You thought they liked you because you were kind, because you gave them the benefit of the doubt, because you saw the good in people. But what if I told you it wasn't kindness they saw? It was a pattern. Every manipulator studies before they strike. Not your strengths, your predictability. Do you always justify yourself? Do you avoid silence like it's a threat? Do you laugh nervously to smooth over tension? Do you nod when you're unsure, just to avoid being judged? That's all they need. They don't have to force anything. They just lean on what you always do. Over time, you stop being a person in their eyes. You become a response system. Push here, get guilt. Push there, get compliance. Threaten silence. Get attention. This isn't paranoia. This is psychology. In behavioral terms, this is called reinforcement looping. You train them to expect your reactions. They train you to stay in the loop. And like all loops, you don't notice you're in one until it tightens. You see, manipulators don't need to control your choices. They just need to narrow them. By watching your emotions, your need for approval, your fear of rejection, they can reduce your options to one: obey or lose connection. That's why they don't shout. They suggest. They hint. They withdraw just enough to make your brain fill in the blanks. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? And just like that, You become the one trying to earn back stability in a game you didn't even realize you were playing. Here's the truth no one wants to hear. If someone can predict you, they can prepare for you. If they can prepare for you, they can control you. This is why Epictetus said, "It's not the things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about those things." The manipulator doesn't control the event. They control how you interpret it. They count on you judging yourself. They count on you assuming you're wrong. Again, they count on your need to smooth things over as their cover. And every time you rush to restore harmony, they take another step forward. So now the question is this. If you had to meet yourself in a moment of pressure, what would they see? Would they see a calm boundary or a predictable collapse? There is no shame in having patterns. We all do. But if you never question them, someone else will use them. Not to love you, not to understand you, but to bend you. And once they can bend you, they won't stop. Because why would they? You've always been the peacemaker, the one who kept the room calm, who said, "It's okay." Even when it wasn't, who offered understanding, even when you were the one bleeding. You weren't trying to please. You were trying to survive. But what began as protection became prison. You learned early that saying no meant conflict, disagreeing meant tension, standing up for yourself meant punishment, not in fists, but in silence, withdrawal, guilt. So you adjusted. You smiled when you didn't mean it. You said sure when you meant absolutely not. You apologized just to make things easier. You weren't weak. You were trained. Here's the twisted part. When people realize you'll break your own boundaries just to keep them comfortable, they don't respect you more. They respect you less. Because you just taught them this. My needs are negotiable. And then it begins. The slow erosion of your will. A little compromise here, a small betrayal there, until one day you realize you haven't said what you actually think in years. You've become an echo of who you used to be. Not because someone forced you, but because you were trying to avoid discomfort. But here's the truth. Discomfort avoided in the short term becomes resentment in the long term. You think you're being nice, but your niceness has no spine, no boundary, no refusal. So to them, it's not kindness, it's access, not generosity, but compliance. And that's exactly what they exploit. Here's a razor-sharp question. Are you helping people, or are you buying peace? And what if that peace is costing you yourself? Epictetus warned about this when he said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." He wasn't telling you to be reckless. He was preparing you for rejection. He knew that choosing integrity often looks like defiance to those who benefit from your submission. So if you feel guilty after saying no, good. That means you're finally drawing a line. And the discomfort you feel is just proof that the prison walls are shaking. Real kindness doesn't fear rejection. Real self-respect doesn't apologize for existing. And real power? It begins the moment you stop explaining your right to have limits. You weren't born to be pleasing. You were born to be whole. And anyone who punishes your boundaries was never trying to understand you. They were trying to use you. Every manipulator has one weapon that never fails. Your guilt. They don't need to scream. They don't need to threaten. All they have to do is tilt their head, sigh, and say one line, "I guess I just expected more from you." And just like that, you fold. Not because they're right, but because you're conditioned to panic at the thought of disappointing someone. You've been taught that saying no makes you selfish, that prioritizing your peace means you don't care, that walking away from toxicity is giving up. So you stay. You try harder. You explain more. You overfunction in relationships because being misunderstood feels like failure. But here's the part you haven't questioned. Why is protecting yourself the one thing that makes you feel guilty? This is not your nature. This is your programming. Somewhere along the line, someone taught you that love is sacrifice, but only from you. Someone taught you that being chosen meant never choosing yourself. And now, you think drawing a boundary is a betrayal. But listen closely. Guilt is not the same as wrong. Feeling bad doesn't mean you did something bad. It just means you broke a pattern that never served you, but served them. Here's a truth that stings. If you feel more shame after saying no than you do after being disrespected, you've been trained to betray yourself. On cue. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Simple, direct, stoic. But for people like you, who've spent a lifetime over-explaining, those two sentences feel like rebellion, because for you, not doing something wrong isn't enough. You also want to be liked for doing it. And that is the hook. Your guilt is the handle they grab every time they want to move you. But it only works as long as you keep proving yourself. Once you stop, once you say, "I said no," that's enough. The lever breaks. You'll feel it. That panic, that silence, that itch to rush back and smooth it over. Don't let it burn, because that fire you feel is your old self melting down, and your real self waking up. You owe no one a performance. You don't need to shrink to be worthy. And you sure as hell don't need to apologize for having limits. The people who guilt you for saying no were never listening when you said yes. And that should tell you everything. You thought silence was strength, that staying quiet made you wise, that walking away without a word proved control. But what if I told you your silence has been speaking for you, and it's been saying all the wrong things? They don't need to dominate you if you're already muted. All they have to do is watch what you don't say. When they dismiss your feelings, you go quiet. When they twist your words, you stay polite. When they step over your boundary, you freeze, then smile. And every time you go silent, you teach them something. I won't fight back. I'll internalize. That's not Stoicism. That's self-erasure. Stoic silence is a choice. Yours has become a reflex. Let's get brutally honest. You didn't stay silent to protect your peace. You stayed silent to avoid discomfort. You weren't being wise. You were being absent from your truth, from your voice, from your dignity. And manipulators, they love that kind of silence because it gives them freedom to rewrite the script, to say, "See, you didn't disagree," to tell others they never had a problem with it, to convince even you that maybe, just maybe, you're overreacting. But here's what silence never says. Stop. That hurt. You crossed the line. So guess what happens? They keep going. Not because they're cruel, but because you never gave them a reason not to. Your silence didn't de-escalate the war. It handed over the battlefield. Here's the paradox. You thought silence would keep the peace, but it only kept you in pieces. Epictetus reminds us, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And what lies within your control? Your voice, your choice, your right to say, this ends here. But you gave all that away, not with a fight, but with silence. Silence, in the right hands, is powerful, but in the hands of fear, it becomes a muzzle. And when you stay quiet for too long, you stop hearing your own boundaries scream. So next time you want to stay silent, ask yourself, am I being wise or am I being erased? Because if your silence protects their comfort more than your clarity, you're not in control, you're in captivity. And one day, after enough nights of clenching your jaw, apologizing for your tone, and biting back what needed to be said, you'll realize something gut-wrenching. They didn't destroy you. You handed them the hammer, and you said nothing while they used it. But it's not too late. The next time they expect your silence, give them something else. A pause, a breath, and then a boundary spoken out loud. Because silence should never be their weapon. It should be your strategy. You've spent years trying to be good enough for people who were never good for you. Years trying to say the right thing, predict the right moment, hold yourself together so they wouldn't fall apart. And where did it get you? Misunderstood, drained, resentful, confused. But it wasn't your kindness that broke you. It was your confusion about control. You tried to control how they saw you. You tried to control their moods, their reactions, even their guilt. You bent, contorted, smiled when you wanted to scream, because you thought if you just managed things well enough, they would finally respect you. They didn't. They won't. Because here's the truth. Respect doesn't come from control. It comes from clarity. And clarity begins with a single question. Is this in my control or not? This question changes everything. Epictetus called it the most important distinction a human being can make. Some things are up to us, and some are not. That's it. That's the lever. That's the escape hatch from every manipulative trap you've been stuck in. You can't control if someone manipulates, but you can control if you participate. You can't control their guilt trips, but you can control whether you climb aboard. You can't stop them from pushing, but you can stop being the door that swings open every time. This isn't about building walls. It's about drawing lines, so your soul doesn't spill into every outstretched hand. Once you ask, is this mine to carry? You stop picking up what was never yours. You stop owning their discomfort. You stop fixing their mess. You stop apologizing for breathing with a spine. Here's the shift. Before, I need to make them understand. After, I need to make myself clear. Before, how do I keep the peace? After, what do I need to protect? Before, I hope they don't get mad. After, their anger is not my burden. This isn't detachment. This is liberation. Because the moment you stop trying to win their approval, you win something far better. Your sovereignty. And yes, you'll be misunderstood. You'll be called selfish, difficult, cold. But so what? Let them call you anything. Just don't let them call the shots. You've tried to control their perception for too long. Now, it's time to control your participation. Say it. I am not responsible for their behavior. I am responsible for my boundary. That's the dichotomy. That's the game flipped. And once you see it, you can never unsee it again. You've seen it now, not just what they did, but how you allowed it, how your patterns paved the way, how your silence, your guilt, your predictability became their blueprint. But this isn't about shame. It's about ending the cycle, because now you know what to look for, and more importantly, you know what to never allow again. From this point forward, you don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need consensus to say no. You don't need to explain why a certain energy no longer gets access to you. That's not cold. That's clarity. That's survival. That's sovereignty. You don't have to fight anyone. You don't have to expose anyone. You just stop playing your part in the dance. And when they come back confused, offended, shocked, don't respond. Don't perform. Don't teach them how to treat you. Let your absence do that. Because when a manipulator realizes they can no longer read you, guilt you into reading yourself, they don't know what to do. They lose access, not to your words, but to your buttons. That's what power really is. Not aggression, not dominance, stillness, choice, presence that can't be pushed. And if you're wondering what to do next, how to reclaim yourself from years of being too nice, too soft, too quiet, too available, it starts with a sentence. This no longer serves me. I'm done. Say it. Whisper it. Write it down. Carve it in the air if you have to. But mean it. Because once you draw that line, and you hold it, even if your voice shakes, you become dangerous in the best way possible. Unpredictable. Let them call you difficult. Let them accuse you of changing. They're right. You are changing. You're no longer available for rehearsed pain. You're no longer willing to confuse guilt with responsibility. You're no longer here to please people who profit from your discomfort. You're done being the easy one. So what now? Now, you live differently. You pause before reacting. You ask, is this mine to fix? You choose who gets your energy, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. That was the last lesson. And it doesn't come with applause, or a thank you, or even closure. It comes with quiet, and one irreversible truth. You don't owe anyone the version of you that didn't know better. If today's video stirred something deep inside, if a part of you just woke up and realized it's been living on autopilot, subscribe, not for advice, but for weapons, for clarity, for the kind of silence that ends cycles, not enables them.